What is going on, guys? So, I was at work today, and somebody at work was talking about how there were these scientists that basically de extincted, if that's even a word, dire wolves. And you might have heard about this, you might not have. It's really making the rounds around there, around the internet. And everybody at work was talking about it. And so I was like, wow, that's really interesting. I'm going to look into that eventually. And so later at work, I was perusing Reddit, as I do, and I came across this post right here where this person was basically asking the question, is this legit? Is the whole direwolf situation real? And I was looking at the comments, and a lot of people were saying that it's not true, it's not real, it's just, one big publicity stunt, for lack of a better word. And so I decided to look into it, and I started doing research, and I came to the conclusion, mostly I used this article here to kind of just look into it. I highly recommend it. It's got a lot of vital information for this story. But basically, there's this company called Colossal Biosciences, and what they have done is they have come out and they have claimed that they basically brought dire wolves, a creature that lived over 10,000 years ago, went extinct, have brought them back into the 21st century with new cutting edge genetics technology. And this was permeated and perpetuated by outlets like Time Magazine, by most notably the Joe Rogan Experience. That's usually where a lot of people at work were talking about it. They were like, oh man, Joe Rogan's been talking to this guy, and this guy, along with his team, recreated direwolves. The fact of the matter is that is just blatantly not true. There's so many things in life that I can't fathom are true or not true. There's this constant war raging on. The direwolves are not real. Now, you may see the pictures, you may see the creatures, and you may think to yourself, that's real, Garrett. I'm looking at it. That is not a direwolf. So basically, from what I understand, this is just based on my understanding. And again, you could just title this video, correct me if I'm wrong, because I always accept that I may or may not be wrong. I'm not a scientist, so I don't know. But basically, from my understanding, these scientists took this cutting edge genetics technology, and what they did was they used it on direwolf skeletal remains, a tooth and a skull, if I'm not mistaken, from thousands of years ago, and were able to extract DNA samples from it. Now, again, I might be getting the terminology a little wrong here, but the general misconception is that they took that DNA, spliced it with modern day wolf DNA, and were able to create direwolves from that. They're not clones. They're not cloning. What they've done, what they've said they've done, is they used the DNA and brought direwolves back. Now, what they've actually done, this is the meat and potatoes here. What they've actually done is they have taken the DNA of the direwolf that they've extracted, studied it through their high-tech genetics equipment. Then they took the genome of a gray wolf, modern-day gray wolf, and then they just went in and edited the genetic structure of this genome to match the physical characteristics of what a direwolf would have looked like. Now, if that doesn't make any sense, they basically took the things that make a direwolf look like a direwolf and mutated a gray wolf, for lack of a better word. Changed its fur color, its length, its texture. It's going to develop certain physical traits that make it similar to a direwolf. But the fact of the matter is, it is not a direwolf. It is a gray wolf that just looks like a direwolf. The way I described this earlier, I went around, I was like telling people at work about this, like my discovery, hoo-ha. But I was basically like, what they did is they created a living model of what a direwolf would have looked like. And there are people out there in the scientific community, paleo ecologists, that have come out and they've been like, this is just bullshit. They didn't create a direwolf. Just because, I might have Neanderthal in me doesn't make me a Neanderthal. I'm Homo sapien. You know what I mean? And the crazy thing about this is these quote unquote dire wolves, we can't learn anything from them that we didn't already know. There's no way they could teach us anything about dire wolves because they're not dire wolves. They don't have the genetic coding. None of the DNA from the dire wolf went into these creatures. There's 3 pups that are out right now. They want to create more. But from my understanding, none of the genetic material they found from the ancient direwolf remains went into these creatures. They basically just kind of tried to recreate the direwolf using modern genetic material. Now, the thing that I think is really scummy about this is just this whole thing is just a publicity stunt meant to spread misinformation so that they can get more investors so that they can make more money. Now, that just might be the pessimistic view that I have towards giant corporations like this, or scientific corporations even, because even scientific corporations have ulterior motives. They can be fallible. Even though their science, has some basis in reality, the thing that they're trying to pitch to people is a fantasy. And I think it's bullshit. Now, the real question that I have here that I wanted to pose was, even if, and this is something they posed in the article that I mentioned earlier, even if you could bring back a direwolf, 100% reintegrate a direwolf into modern day society and modern day wilderness and all that crap, what does that accomplish? Nothing more than just the bragging rights to say that you could do it, but it doesn't accomplish anything. You're bringing back an animal that was extinct, probably extinct for any number of reasons. But you're talking about bringing back a 6-foot-tall wolf into modern day world, in a modern world, where even the largest animals that we have were considered mid-size during the time period this creature was alive. It doesn't make any sense. Also, second, there is this idea that the science actually does have some kind of sound logic behind it. The science can be used for actual purposes, actual conservative purposes, such as maintaining or widening the gene pool for actually currently endangered species, like the white rhino, for example. Just something that comes off the top of my head. Use the technology to genetically create rhinos that are a match with white rhinos, the white rhinos we have in captivity, and broaden the gene pool for those white rhinos. Bring the white rhino population back. But I don't see something like that happening. Usually when stuff like this happens, it's, like I said, ulterior motives. They're just trying to make money. One thing I found really interesting about this is that this is just meant to feed into people's egos and their fantasies. And I found that was none more evident than when one of the guys, this was, again, if you so choose, the Joe Rogan podcast man went into this. I forgot his name, but he's from Colossal Biosciences. And he basically said Peter Jackson was one of the investors, Peter Jackson of Lord of the Rings fame. I found that very interesting. Apparently he's a huge Game of Thrones fan and was a huge backer behind getting direwolves made. And I think they just took him for a big loop, basically. And I think that's what they're doing in general. I see that as a greater analogy for what they're trying to do to so many people. So many people that I've seen out there genuinely believe this is real. And luckily there's some people out there that know this is bullshit. But yeah, that's about it.